Namaste everyone and welcome back. Imagine this. Just 2 years ago, India and Canada were at their worst diplomatic point in decades. Diplomats were being expelled, trade talks were frozen, students were stuck with visa backlogs. The two countries couldn't even agree on the same narrative about a killing in Canada. And then, in March 2026, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney flew to New Delhi. And the transformation was dramatic. PM Modi himself said, Prime Minister Carney has not even completed 1 year in office, yet our relations have leapt forward by a light year. So what happened? Why this sudden reset? What deals were signed? And most importantly, what does this mean for India's strategic interests? Today, we break it all down. This is your complete guide to the India-Canada strategic reset, from the crisis of 2023 to the partnership of 2026. And we'll end with the UPSC angles, because this topic is absolutely exam-worthy. Let's begin.
Here's the plan for today's session. We have 4 big sections. First, we'll understand the background. How did India-Canada ties actually collapse? What was the Nijjar killing? What were the diplomatic consequences? Second, we ask, why reset now? Why not earlier? What changed? Third, and this is the meatiest section, we'll dissect all the key outcomes of Carney's 2026 visit. The CEPA, the nuclear deal, the critical minerals MoU, defense dialogue, and people-to-people ties. Fourth, we'll examine the significance and challenges, and what the way forward looks like. I'll also give you UPSC Mains potential questions at the end, so stay till the end. Let's go.
Section 1. From crisis to reset.
Let me tell you a story. Let's look at the timeline, because this story unfolds like a thriller. June 2023, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian Sikh activist, head of the Khalistani Tiger Force, designated a terrorist by India's NIA, is shot dead outside a Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. Canada, naturally, begins an investigation. September 2023. Then comes the bombshell. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stands up in Parliament and makes a stunning allegation. He says there are credible allegations of a link between Indian government agents and Nijjar's killing. India's response? Swift and furious. India calls the allegation absurd and motivated, and then it escalates. Both countries start expelling diplomats. India demands staffing parity, and this forces Canada to withdraw a whopping 41 diplomats and their families from India. Think about that. 41 people suddenly packing up and leaving. Visa applications pile up. CEPA, the big trade deal that was in progress, is suspended. Throughout 2024, relations stay frozen. Both capitals have no top envoys. The diplomatic freeze is complete. Then, April 2025, a new character enters. Mark Carney replaces Trudeau as Prime Minister, and Carney quietly begins walking back the hardline stance. Canadian officials start saying no ongoing interference concerns. The biggest political obstacle begins to shift. June 2025. Carney invites Modi to the G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta. Modi attends. They meet bilaterally. High commissioners are reinstated, ministerial channels reopen. And finally, March 2026. Carney visits India, the first bilateral visit by a Canadian PM since 2018, and a historic set of agreements is announced. This is the arc: crisis, caution, thaw, reset. But the key question is, why did this reset happen? Let's look at that next.
Before we move to the reset, let's make sure we understand the crisis properly. Who was Hardeep Singh Nijjar? He was a Canadian citizen, originally from Punjab, and a vocal advocate for Khalistani, a separate Sikh homeland carved out of India. India's NIA designated him a terrorist. Canada, however, views peaceful advocacy for political causes, even controversial ones, as constitutionally protected under freedom of expression. And here's the fundamental tension. India sees Khalistani activism as a direct security threat. Canada sees it as free speech. When Trudeau made his allegation in Parliament, it elevated what might have been a quiet diplomatic matter into a full-blown public confrontation. Canadian officials later admitted that this approach narrowed space for quiet diplomatic management.
The result? A prolonged freeze. Now, was the allegation proven? To date, there has been no public conclusive proof. And when Carney came to power, his government quietly stepped back from Trudeau's framing. The economic cost was enormous. CEPA stalled. Canada became, and I want you to remember this phrase for UPSC, the only G7 country without a preferential trade deal with India. While Canada was frozen, the EU, the UK, New Zealand, and even EFTA were signing preferential access deals with India. India's market of 1.4 billion people was effectively giving Canada's competitors a cost advantage. This is why the reset was not just desirable, it became economically necessary.
Now let's talk about the three engines that powered this reset. Engine 1, the Trump factor. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he immediately started throwing tariffs at Canada. Canada, which sends nearly 75 to 80% of its exports to the US, suddenly found its biggest trade relationship under threat. The US was, in the words of one analyst, extremely volatile, not particularly predictable, and destabilizing institutions around the world. Canada needed to diversify. India, the fastest growing major economy, was the obvious destination. From India's side, the logic was symmetric. India is in a strategic competition with China. It wants Western partners for technology, uranium, critical minerals, and capital. But it doesn't want to be overdependent on the US either. Enter Canada. Engine 2, the Indo-Pacific realignment. Canada released its Indo-Pacific strategy in 2022, explicitly naming India as a key partner. But then the Nijjar crisis made Canada's own strategy look incoherent. You can't freeze your most important Indo-Pacific partner while claiming to have an Indo-Pacific strategy. Restoring ties was essential for credibility. Engine 3, the Carney difference. Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau. He's a former Bank of England governor. He's a finance man, pragmatic, numbers-driven. He came to power on a platform of economic resilience. And when Modi congratulated him on his election victory, Carney immediately signaled his desire to strengthen the partnership. The result? As Carney himself put it, more engagement between our two governments this year than in any year over the past 2 decades combined. All right, now that we understand why the reset happened, let's get into the what. What exactly was agreed? Section 2, the meat of the session. What did Carney actually bring home? Let's look at all 5 pillars. Let's go through each one. The outcomes of Carney's visit can be organized into 5 pillars. Pillar 1, trade and CEPA, the big economic framework. Pillar 2, nuclear energy, the headline deal. Pillar 3, critical minerals and clean energy, the strategic supply chain story. Pillar 4, defense and diplomacy, the security architecture. Pillar 5, people, talent, and innovation, the long-term glue. Let's go through each one. Pillar 1, CEPA. CEPA stands for Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Think of it as a full-spectrum free trade deal, covering goods, services, investment, and intellectual property. Here's the context. Current bilateral trade is USD 30.9 billion. India was Canada's 7th largest trading partner in 2024. That sounds decent, but consider this. Canadian merchandise exports to India were only USD 5.3 billion, less than 1% of all Canadian exports. The target? Double bilateral trade to USD 50 to 70 billion by 2030. That's the ambition. What was signed during the visit? The terms of reference for CEPA, essentially the ground rules and scope for negotiations. Chief negotiators from both sides had already met in New Delhi, and the High Commissioner said a deal could come in less than 12 months. Now, why was CEPA so important? Because while Canada was frozen, its competitors were moving fast. The EU got a deal. The UK got a deal. New Zealand got a deal. Even EFTA, Norway, Switzerland, and others got a deal. The US, under Trump, has an interim pact. This means India was charging Canada's competitors lower tariffs than Canada. That's a direct cost disadvantage for Canadian exporters. What does India export to Canada? Pharmaceuticals, machinery, electronics, precious stones and metals, iron and steel products. And what does Canada export to India? Vegetables, mineral fuels, wood pulp, fertilizers, and paper.
For UPSC, note that India has a trade surplus with Canada. We export more than we import. CEPA is also important for India's push to become a global manufacturing hub under Make in India.
Pillar 2, and honestly, the most dramatic outcome of the visit, the civil nuclear deal. Here are the facts. India's Department of Atomic Energy signed a USD 2.6 billion contract with Cameco Corporation, a company headquartered in Saskatoon, Canada. Under this deal, Cameco will supply approximately 22 million pounds of uranium ore concentrates to India between 2027 and 2035. Why does this matter? First, the context of Indian nuclear ambitions. India currently generates about 7.5 gigawatts of nuclear power. But under the Viksit Bharat 2047 vision, India's roadmap to become a developed nation, India plans to scale nuclear power capacity to 100 gigawatts by 2047. That's a 13x increase. You need a lot of uranium for that. Second, the strategic significance. India-Canada civil nuclear cooperation had been suspended ever since India's 1974 nuclear test, codenamed Smiling Buddha. Canada supplied the Cirrus reactor to India, and when India tested a bomb, Canada called it a betrayal of the Peaceful Use Agreement and cut all nuclear cooperation. For over 50 years, there was a cloud over this relationship. This deal signals complete normalization of the most sensitive area of their bilateral ties. Third, Canada's position. Canada is the world's second largest uranium producer, and Cameco is the world's largest publicly listed uranium company. This is a natural fit. Canada has the supply, India has the demand. Remember, the Strait of Hormuz disruption during the Middle East conflict was affecting 60% of India's LNG imports. India's energy security strategy is about diversification. Uranium from Canada is a critical piece of this puzzle. Pillar 3, critical minerals and clean energy. This might sound technical, but it is deeply strategic. Let me explain. The world is shifting to EVs, solar panels, wind turbines, and battery storage. All of these need critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths. And right now, China dominates the processing and supply of these minerals. The G7 and India are trying to build alternative, secure supply chains that don't run through China. Under the India-Canada MoU on critical minerals, both countries will work to develop supply chains aligned with the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan. India's mineral reserves are significant, but its processing capacity is limited. Canada has both reserves and the technology. This is a win-win. Other notable announcements under this pillar: Canada joining ISA and GBA. ISA is the International Solar Alliance, India's brainchild, launched with France in 2015. GBA is the Global Biofuels Alliance, launched at India's G20 presidency in 2023. Canada joining both sends a strong signal. Energy Storage MoU, covering solar, wind, biomass, and bioenergy. This supports India's ambitious 500 gigawatt renewable target by 2030. Strategic Energy Partnership covering LNG, LPG, hydrogen, and uranium. Canada wants to sell LNG to India. Canada is scaling up LNG production to 50 million tons per year by 2030. And there's also a very interesting food security angle, a joint pulse protein center of excellence at NIFTM-K in Kundli, focused on protein extraction from pulses to address micronutrient deficiencies in India. Both Canada and India are major pulse producers.
Pillars 4 and 5: defense, diplomacy, and people-to-people ties. On defense, the most significant announcement here is the establishment of the first-ever India-Canada Defense Dialogue. This creates an institutional mechanism for regular strategic security discussions. Before this, there was no such formal forum. An India-Canada Parliament Friendship Group was created, building people-level legislative ties beyond just government-to-government communication. India's support for Canada's entry into IOORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, as a dialogue partner is also notable. IOORA is a key forum for Indian Ocean governance, and India's backing gives Canada a foothold in this strategically vital region. The NSA-level security framework agreed earlier, covering drug smuggling, transnational crime, violent extremism, and illegal immigration fraud, is now being implemented. On people, talent, and innovation, the India-Canada CEO Forum has been reconstituted. This is the private sector engagement mechanism. The AICTE MyTax MoU will provide 300 fully funded research internships for Indian students in Canada. AICTE is India's technical education regulator. MyTax is Canada's leading research internship organization. The India-Canada-Australia Trilateral MoU under the ACIT partnership, focusing on AI and emerging technologies, is especially interesting because it brings in Australia, deepening the democratic middle power axis. And 13 new university partnerships were launched, spanning AI, hydrogen, digital agriculture, and health sciences. Remember, the Indian diaspora in Canada is 1.8 million strong, about 4% of Canada's entire population. India is also the largest source of international students in Canada. These people-to-people ties are an enormous soft power asset.
Section 3. Let's step back and look at the big picture. Why does this relationship actually matter? Let me hit you with some numbers that frame the significance of this relationship. 75 plus years of diplomatic ties, upgraded to a strategic partnership in 2018. Canadian pension funds have invested over USD $75 billion in India. Carney took the heads of all 9 major Canadian pension funds to Mumbai, companies with a combined market cap of USD $600 billion. That's how big the investment opportunity is. The Indian diaspora is 1.8 million in Canada. That's 4% of the Canadian population, a massive soft power bridge. During the visit, more than 10 commercial agreements were signed, expected to create thousands of jobs in Canada and boost bilateral investment. These aren't just diplomatic photo ops. These are structural economic ties. And now the geopolitical lens. Both India and Canada are democracies. Both support a rules-based, free and open Indo-Pacific. Both are worried about Chinese assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. Both are looking to reduce dependence on China's supply chains. This is natural strategic alignment. Canada's 2022 Indo-Pacific strategy explicitly named India as one of 12 priority countries. For Canada to have that strategy while having frozen ties with India made zero sense. The reset corrects this incoherence. There's also Carney's broader foreign policy philosophy. He articulated in Davos that middle powers must cooperate more closely in the face of global fractures. India is the world's most populous nation, the 5th largest economy, and a permanent UNSC aspirant. Canada is a G7 member. Together, they represent a powerful democratic middle power axis. Note this for UPSC. This visit was part of Carney's broader Indo-Pacific tour that also included Australia and Japan, signaling a systematic democratic coalition-building exercise. On the multilateral front, India and Canada cooperate at the UN, WTO, and ICAO. India supports Canada's IORA entry. And there are long-standing legal frameworks, an extradition treaty from 1987, a mutual legal assistance treaty from 1994, a counterterrorism joint working group from 1997. But let's not paint this as a fairy tale. Section 4, the challenges and the way forward. One expert described the current state as a meaningful thaw, moving in the right direction, but not a clean slate. That's exactly right. Let me walk you through the main challenges. Challenge 1, the Nijjar shadow. During Carney's visit, literally while the Canadian delegation was preparing, Canadian police knocked on a Sikh activist's door in Surrey to inform him his life was at risk. This shows how the security issue hasn't disappeared. The Nijjar killing remains the single biggest political constraint on the relationship. Challenge 2, Khalistani extremism. India is deeply concerned about anti-India separatist activities on Canadian soil, attacks on Indian consulates, threats to diaspora members, pro-Khalistan rallies. India sees this as existential. Canada sees it through a free speech lens. This fundamental tension hasn't been resolved. Challenge 3, trade barriers. India's high agricultural tariffs, Canada's strict sanitary standards, IPR disputes, limited mobility for Indian professionals. These will all need to be negotiated through CEPA, and that process has historically been slow and contentious. Challenge 4, visa and consular backlogs. The 2023-24 freeze dramatically reduced diplomatic staffing. The backlog for students, tourists, and business professionals hasn't fully cleared. The way forward.
The NSA security framework, already agreed, needs to be implemented with concrete action on violent extremism and organized crime. An early harvest trade deal in less contentious sectors can build trust while the full CEPA is negotiated. Restoring full diplomatic staffing and streamlining visa processes is essential, and cultural and educational exchanges, expanded by this visit, will build people-level trust that outlasts political cycles.
All right, let's get to the exam prep section. For GS Paper 2, International Relations, you could be asked to analyze the factors that led to India-Canada diplomatic tensions in 2023-24 and evaluate the reset of 2026. In your answer, cover the Nijjar killing and Trudeau's allegations, the economic costs, the Carney factor, Trump's tariff shock, and the structural complementarity argument. You could also be asked about CEPA in the context of India's broader trade diversification. Link it to PLI schemes, Make in India, and India's effort to build non-US, non-China trade relationships. For GS Paper 3, the nuclear deal connects directly to India's energy security, the Viksit Bharat nuclear vision, and the significance of civil nuclear partnerships. Also, critical minerals MoU links to the EV ecosystem, battery supply chains, and Atmanirbhar Bharat in strategic sectors. For an essay, the theme of middle power cooperation in a multipolar world is very relevant. India-Canada-Australia axis as a democratic alternative power structure. The keywords to use: strategic partnership, 2018, CEPA, civil nuclear deal, critical minerals action plan, ISA, GBA, IORA, ACTI partnership, Viksit Bharat 2047, Khalistani extremism, Nijjar, Carney, middle power cooperation. Always structure your UPSC answers around context, analysis, way forward. Don't just describe what happened. Analyze why it matters for India. Let me give you the 5 big takeaways to close. 1. This reset is driven by pragmatism, not just goodwill. Both nations need each other, economically and strategically. 2. The 3-pronged economic foundation, CEPA, nuclear deal, critical minerals, is designed to be durable enough to survive political turbulence. 3. The Nijjar shadow hasn't disappeared. This is a meaningful thaw, not a clean slate. Don't overstate the warmth. 4. Canada's U.S. dependence and India's China concerns create powerful structural incentives that will keep this relationship moving forward. 5. For India, this aligns perfectly with Viksit Bharat 2047, nuclear energy, clean energy transition, supply chain diversification, and talent mobility. As PM Carney said during the visit, India is the fastest-growing major economy and a powerhouse of global commerce and technology. In a rapidly changing world, Canada and India are transforming their economies to be more diversified, more independent, and more resilient. That's the vision. The hard work of implementation lies ahead. If this video helped you, please hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel reach more aspirants. Drop your questions in the comments and share this with your study group. See you in the next one. Jai Hind.